While the Wills brothers were packing out canes, fostering Tulsa's national image as the home of Western swing, and Patti Page was on her way to becoming the singing rage, one of the very few popular singers who continued to chart giant hits even when rock and roll began to dominate, the still happening jazz scene was embracing R&B and filling dance floors. The most notable were the Clarence Love Band and the Ernie Fields Big Band. Ernie Sr. not only fronted one of jazz's most popular bands, he also managed other entertainers and had his own record company. In the 1950s, he garnered more national fame by recording In the Mood with a rocking beat.
I'm not actually a junior, but I had to become a junior because Dad had already reached some degree of being famous. He had a hit called In the Mood, which was a remake of Glenn Miller's old In the Mood, and sent me through college.
So In the Mood had been cut actually before by several big bands, but it was kind of a smooth, easy version of it. And Ernie added, I guess what you'd say, kind of a hip rock and roll thing to it, man. Sort of a chunk, 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 that kind of thing to it, and kind of rocked and rolled it, if you will. And that's probably what made that record sell.
We called him Road Daddy. I got to know him real well, and got to play with his band. Got to know he and Ernie Fields Jr., his son, that was educated because they had just cut that record In the Mood, and it was real hot then. In fact, they had it on the jukebox at Langston. We used to listen to it all the time.
Like lots of other American cities, Tulsa was segregated. Remember, the 1921 race riot wasn't that long before. But by all accounts, the music community was fairly immune to such division.
Tulsa was hardcore segregated at the time. I'm talking about the 50s, and there was white and colored drinking fountains, white and colored neighborhoods, white and colored never did meet in schools. And you go down to the Greyhound bus station, there's white and colored waiting rooms, white and colored restrooms. And the only thing that they couldn't segregate was the airwaves.
The music scene was segregated except for musicians. Dad was a good friend of Bob Wills. He was a good friend of Leon McCullough. They exchanged musicians, and they were all very close.
They didn't have a nightclub here, but on the north side I'm talking about. They had houses they'd rent. The mistress would cook chicken, steaks, and sold whiskey. All over Tulsa, they had this plantation, chicken shack. They had a place in Tulsa run by a woman named Florence, right over on Peoria here. They were all in homes. They weren't even in buildings. Except they do the same thing, cook chicken, steak. They'd go by place. But Florence had this house over here on Peoria. She did make a little space to put a little three-piece band in hers, but the rest of them didn't have live music. They just had a jukebox, as I call it.
When I was growing up, Oklahoma was dry, and there were juke joints around that sold bootleg whiskey. And those were the joints where the musicians, if they had a gig in the white part of town, they would come over and jam after hours in those joints. And there was one right across the street from where I grew up. It was a chicken plantation. And there was a coexistent thing. There was a church next door to the chicken plantation. And the musicians would be jamming, and like about 8 o'clock, somebody from the church would come over and say, "Would you guys mind stopping now? We're getting ready to start services over here." And we say, yeah, cool, man.
What was happening in those days, of anybody that I knew anything about, was J.J. Cale was the only really bluesy guy happening. Aside from the black guys that I didn't get a chance too much to hear, you know, it just was not physically allowed for black and white people to hang out much. I snuck and tried, you know.
That's probably why I started going over to the north side to hear it, because you certainly didn't hear it on this side of town. Nobody played it, even though they might have listened to it on the radio or had the records of it. Those acts didn't play on this side of town. There wasn't any place for them to play.
So I decided to open up my own nightclub. In October 4th of 1948, I opened what they call the Clarence Love Lounge here in Tulsa, 604 East Archer. That's where I met doing the Wanda Page, all the Lionel Hampton's a good friend of mine. He's been Woody Herman. They all used to jam after hours. We stayed there from 11 to 11 one time, jamming. It was the first black and tan club in the city of Tulsa like that.
Musicians and music lovers always seem to find a way to get together despite segregation. Safe establishments like Clarence Love's Lounge nourished the evolution of rock and roll, but touring musicians were still meeting discrimination head-on.
Ernie Sr. was the sweetest guy, and we were playing some clubs, I remember in Missouri, and it was white supper clubs, everybody like tuxedos and very formal, and we had to dress up, but we couldn't go in the front door because it was a black band. I was the only white guy. We had to go in the back door, and when on break, we'd go back in the kitchen with the black employees, and we had to stay in the black motels and eat in the black restaurants. And there was no sign of bitterness with Ernie. He was glad because he would say, we're having more fun than they are.